On Sunday, September 22nd, 1984, Australia experienced what is still regarded as its worst biker violence ever. What was meant to be a fun Father's Day outing turned into a nightmare between two biker gangs, resulting in 28 injuries and 7 deaths, including that of an innocent 14-year-old girl. The Milpera massacre didn't happen overnight. According to police reports and statements from gang experts and journalists, the conflict had been brewing for years. Lost souls were allegedly involved, battle plans were drawn, and it was only a matter of time before blood was spilled. Continue watching as we dissect the Father's Day massacre, the parties involved, and the events leading up to the mass shooting. It all began in 1968 in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, when William Jack Ross founded the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, inspired by the 1961 John Wayne film, The Comancheros. Ross, a Scottish immigrant with a tough background and a former soldier, joined the British Army at 17, working as a minesweeper for 7 years. Speculative psychologists suggest that Ross was captivated by life in the military, which is often centered around loyalty, discipline, and toughness. Even though he left the ranks, he never really stopped being a soldier. Known for his charisma and natural leadership, Ross exuded pure machismo, traits that undoubtedly helped him build what would become Australia's largest and most violent outlaw bikie club. The Comanchero Bickies were unlike anything ever seen in Sydney. What began as a group of around 5 motorcycle enthusiasts quickly grew, soon hitting double digits. With Ross as the self-declared supreme leader, the club adopted a paramilitary structure with organized weekly training drills. Occasional brawls against rival bikers became common, and Ross meticulously planned their attacks with military precision. It was tough, but they thrived on it. In a 2019 interview, Ross stated that the club was always armed. He explained that guns were much easier to acquire back then, and the club was well stocked from the beginning. On the wall of the Comanchero clubhouse, he hung a sign that read, "If it's white, sniff it. If it's female or it moves, fuck it. If it narcs, kill it." In 1974, the club's reputation attracted Anthony Spencer. Those close to him described Spencer as a lost soul haunted by his past. His father abandoned him when he was a toddler, and his mother, plagued by mental illness, took her own life shortly after. Spencer spent much of his childhood and teens hopping from one orphanage to another, searching for a place to call home. Even in the orphanages, other children didn't take kindly to him, and he recalled an incident where they tried to drown him. Determined to overcome his fear of water, Spencer joined the Royal Australian Navy at 17. Fellow naval servicemen recalled young Spencer bursting into tears of joy whenever anyone showed him kindness. By the age of 19, after 2 years in the Navy, the Comancheros were everything to Spencer. He adored Ross, who became a surrogate father to him, providing the love he had never received. Unfortunately, their relationship began to decline after a few years. Spencer became more independent, forming bonds with other members and maintaining a happy relationship with a girlfriend. His past experiences led him to become an extreme alcoholic and pothead, which only worsened the situation. The final straw was when he wasn't invited to Ross's second wedding. Ross's bride vetoed his presence, stating, "He was always stoned and you know how stupid he gets. I'm not going to have him ruin my wedding." It was around this time that the Comanchero's Bikie Club started to suffer. Even Ross's wife noticed something was off. It was the beginning of the end. Several theories have circulated about what caused the once strong and tightly bound Comancheros to crumble. In an interview in late 1983, former Comanchero Sergeant-at-Arms Colin Campbell revealed that he and his brothers caught their supreme leader, William Ross, in an inappropriate position with a member's wife. These were serious allegations against what was considered one of the club's 10 commandments. Rule 4 specifically stated, any member found guilty of screwing another member's old lady or taking advantage of a rift between couples for future conning will be thrown out. As Sergeant-at-Arms, Campbell explained that he had no choice but to order Ross to face the charges. If found guilty, it would fall upon him to expel his boss. Interestingly, the Supreme Leader never showed up at the first two summits. According to Campbell, Ross only briefly appeared at the third meeting to announce that the club would now have 2 operating bases. He simply said this and walked out. In short, those who supported the charges were allowed to split and form their own chapter. These included the 6 Campbell brothers, Anthony Spencer, the McIlwain brothers, and Charles Scaveras. However, in a 2019 interview, Ross himself provided a contradicting account of what led to the split. He said everything started falling apart after moving the clubhouse headquarters from Harris Park to a Birch Grove waterside mansion. To him, the move was necessary to accommodate the club's growing numbers as younger people took up the colors. Ross explained that it was this younger generation that caused him the worst headaches. They weren't as disciplined as the older Comancheros and were more into drugs and partying than honoring the club's traditions. All day, every day, they hosted drinking sprees with metal music and frequent brawls. Slowly, they started despising Ross's guts. They didn't like the authoritarian rule and especially hated his weekly drills. One former Comanchero passionately told the media, "If I wanted to march around in the fucking backyard, I would have joined the fucking army." Eventually, Ross and his older members had enough and decided to return to Harris Park. They couldn't keep up with the wild younger Comancheros and let them stay at the mansion as they retreated to what they were familiar with. Ross did this, thinking it would ease the tension between the 2 generations, but he was terribly wrong. To this day, Ross bitterly regrets that decision. With Spencer as the new Birch Grove Comancheros president, the chapter worsened over time. However, what Spencer did next forever changed Australia's outlaw biker scene. In 1981, as one of his first acts as chapter president, Spencer embarked on a quest. Fellow bikers sent him to the United States to buy Harley-Davidson motorcycle parts, which were difficult and expensive to obtain in Australia. While shopping, Spencer came across the Texas Bandidos Motorcycle Club and their national president, Ronald Hodge, also known as Mr. Prospect. Spencer was quickly enamored with their kindness and respect, and even more ecstatic when they mentioned doing business with him. Hodge pitched the idea of opening a multinational pipeline to sell legitimate and stolen motorcycle parts in Australia. In return, Spencer had to agree to a patchover. The young Comanchero president agreed, marking one of the Bandidos' most impressive achievements. Hodge wanted more than motorcycle parts. He wanted Australia's P2P, a chemical necessary for amphetamine manufacture. Not only was it cheaper in Australia, but it was also legal. Additionally, he established the first Bandidos chapter outside the US, making it a multinational motorcycle club. Back home, everyone in the Birch Grove chapter readily agreed to the patchover and couldn't wait to abandon their Comanchero colors. Surprisingly, Ross commented that despite feeling betrayed, he was relieved when he heard the news. He was somewhat glad, as he and his older Comancheros were fed up with the Birch Grove chapter. In his words, "We didn't want him." Ross was more upset about how Spencer and his men handled the transition rather than the change itself. Ross demanded the Birch Grove mansion back, as it belonged to the Comancheros. Not only did Spencer refuse to return it, but some of his men also burned their former colors, considered the highest form of bicky disrespect. Thus, the first strings of tension were tightened between the Comancheros and the newly formed Bandidos. The next few months saw members of the 2 clubs exchanging fists whenever they met in taverns and pubs. One notable incident on August 9, 1984, involved 3 Comancheros being brutally beaten by the Bandidos. Injuries were sustained, but nothing lethal. However, one afternoon, the conflict escalated further. Ross recalled being trailed and knocked off his bike by a mysterious vehicle. Investigations weren't necessary. Everyone knew who was behind the wheel. The Supreme Leader quickly picked up the phone to confront Spencer, and after exchanging a few harsh words, the two national presidents officially declared war starting August 11, 1984. They set boundaries, agreeing that no brawls would happen in public or at other members' homes. However, egos grew, and one afternoon, reason was thrown out the window. That day was Father's Day, Sunday, September 2nd, 1984. Contrary to what happened, Sunday, September 2nd had the potential to be a great day. Not only was it Father's Day, but the British Motorcycle Club had organized a well-attended swap meet at the Milpera Vikings Tavern. This special day was when bikers set aside their differences, met under friendly banners, enjoyed barbecues, and shopped for new and used motorcycle parts and memorabilia. Families often accompanied their bike enthusiast fathers to the event, hoping to have a great time and find the perfect gift. According to witness accounts, the day started well, and everyone was enjoying themselves, patiently waiting for lunch. However, around 1 p.m., the rumbling bellies were overpowered by the sound of 19 Comanchero bickies as they thundered into the Vikings Tavern parking lot. Since it was a bikers' event, this wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Nonetheless, several people couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. The vibe suddenly turned cold, and it was hard to ignore the rifles fastened onto their handlebars. The Supreme Commander, Jack Ross, slowly got up from his motorcycle, walkie-talkie in hand. He seemed to have planned everything out and, without warning, motioned his men into positions. The idea was to lay bait, wait for their Bandidos targets, and quickly trap them in a pincer movement. Ross was so confident in this tactic that he set himself up as bait to lure in Spencer and his young Bandidos comrades. 10 minutes passed, and the Australian Bandidos were nowhere to be seen. The Comancheros were getting impatient, and some men were distracted. Even Ross himself couldn't wait any longer and decided to walk into the bar for a drink. At 1:20 p.m., most Comancheros were off their posts and scattered across the tavern. Moments later, the Bandidos showed up. With 34 motorcycles in total, the Comancheros were not only caught off guard, but also severely outnumbered. On top of that, the Bandidos brought along several cars and vans full of assorted weapons. Just like the Comancheros, they had a plan. They quickly parked at the western end of the car park, distributed guns and weapons among the ranks, and immediately confronted their rivals. Witnesses testified that the initial confrontation was far from lethal. Even though both sides were armed, they only exchanged hurtful words, daring each other to put down the guns and fight like men. However, peace only lasted so long before an accidental shotgun was discharged into the air. Then, as if possessed, both parties suddenly charged at each other with fists, guns, chains, baseball bats, knives, machetes, and any other weapons they could find. Contrary to some newspaper reports, no battle lines were drawn. Although the media or police never mentioned it, some civilians noted that several bikers' wives and girlfriends took part in the fight. Bandidos Sergeant-at-Arms Campbell confirmed this, claiming that one wife of the Comancheros shot him several times with a handgun. His brother, Gregory Campbell, was the first to fall after taking a bullet to the throat, dying instantly. The Bandidos' vice president soon followed after taking 2 shotgun rounds to the chest, also dying instantly. Not long after, a Comanchero had his arm chopped off as the flames of battle grew wilder. Around 7 meters from the battlefield, 14-year-old Leanne was shocked by what was unfolding before her eyes. One witness described a bicky in a rage, firing in all directions. Suddenly, in what felt like the blink of an eye, the young girl beside him dropped to the ground. To his horror, he realized she had taken a full shotgun blast to the face. Meanwhile, Ross was still at the back of the tavern when all of this was happening. Perhaps deafened by old age or the pub music, it took him a few moments to finally hear what was going on outside. Once he realized, he quickly threw away his drink and charged into the battlefield, waving a machete in one hand and a pick handle in the other. Another report stated that he shouted, "Kill them all," as he ran to meet his rivals. Ross would later defend himself, saying he never uttered such words. He insisted he never used his machete, only drawing it back to threaten one bandido if he didn't withdraw. Unknown to him, that would be his last memory of the day. Seconds later, Ross took a bullet to the foot, forcing him to stumble forward. Another round into his chest took him down. The gunman went even further, unleashing another shot into his head, knocking out teeth and penetrating his brain. At this point, the situation was beyond salvaging. Around 400 innocent civilians ran about as others lay on the ground, many taking cover behind their vehicles, fearing they might get a bullet in the back. One such person was young Linda, sitting inside her pickup truck reading a book before a round hit her windscreen, forcing her to take cover. In what she described as a confusing flood of emotions, she went from fear to anger. Linda was furious with what the Bickies were doing and bravely risked her life by taking 7 pictures of the chaos. In her own words, her camera was a weapon, and she was going to shoot with it. Her photos eventually became cornerstone evidence against the Comancheros and Bandidos Bickies. It wasn't long before news reached the nearest police station that a man had gone berserk with a rifle at the Milpera Tavern. Unfortunately, the first of more than 200 police officers arrived, 15 minutes after the fighting had ended. The Milpera Massacre, or as many call it, the Father's Day Massacre, lasted about 10 minutes with around 30 shots fired. By the time the gun smoke cleared, 7 people lay dead and 28 more were injured, with 20 needing hospitalization. Constable John Garvey was among the first officers to arrive at the scene, wearing plain clothes, a move he could have easily regretted. In a brave effort to neutralize the situation, he took it upon himself to enter the tavern through the back door, where he was confronted by Comanchero Raymond, armed with a shotgun and his finger on the trigger. After revealing his identity as a police officer, Raymond asked him to call an ambulance for his injured men. Garvey saw this as an opportunity to get Raymond and his Comancheros to surrender their weapons. After a tense argument, both agreed to put their shotguns on the ground. Raymond then took Garvey to the battlefield, where, with outstretched arms, all bikers still standing surrendered their weapons. The Viking Tavern's car park was painted with blood and littered with dead bodies, as injured bikers moaned in pain. Those who regained their senses were coming to terms with what they had done, while traumatized innocents screamed in the background. Even though no arrests were made that night, the authorities, under Ron Stevenson, immediately launched Operation Hardware, which gave many investigators sleepless nights, interviewing over 400 people. Linda's 7 detailed photos were instrumental in establishing who was where during the incident and identifying the faces behind the carnage. Eventually, all the responsible Comancheros and Bandidos were arrested pending prosecution in what would become Australia's longest and most expensive trial, costing around $12 million. 1,500 jurors were summoned and hosted at the Parramatta Leagues Club to await selection. Finally, after close scrutiny, only 12 were deemed capable enough to sit on the case, and thus the court proceedings began for the 31 accused. At least 58 policemen were deployed during each court session, including armed tactical operations unit members stationed in the courtroom. Witnesses also required armed guards from the witness security unit to escort them home. Despite the 7 photos serving as concrete evidence, Linda was also required to testify before the jury. It wasn't easy for the 23-year-old, who saw bikers and their supporters making cutthroat signals at her as she walked through the court corridors. In a 2019 interview, she explained that she spent at least 20 years receiving death threats and frequently changing towns and jobs, fearing for her life. More than 2 years later, on June 12, 1987, the jury delivered 63 murder, 174 manslaughter, and 31 affray convictions. Ross was named the instigator of the violence because, as club president, he was primarily responsible for the decision of his members to go to Milpera on force and armed. He and 4 other Comancheros received life sentences for murder. 16 Bandidos were also found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 7 years behind bars. Anthony Spencer, the national president of the Bandidos, committed suicide in prison before he could stand trial. Prison authorities found a suicide note beside his hanging body in which he apologized to his brothers and family for all that had transpired. 2 years later, in 1989, 3 Comancheros successfully appealed their murder convictions, which were subsequently reduced to manslaughter. Finally, in 1992, Jock Ross was the last Milpera Bicky released, having served the longest sentence at 5 years and 3 months. Following the incident, the New South Wales government sought to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again and updated the Firearms and Dangerous Weapons Act. It strictly stated that a good reason was henceforth required for the issue of a firearm license. The previous law allowed registered owners the right to carry firearms in public. In both 1994 and 2019 interviews, Ross confidently stated that he could look himself in the mirror, knowing he was not to blame for what happened in Milpera. According to him, his men were attacked, he didn't kill anyone, only acted in self-defense, and all he got were bullets and a 5-year sentence. As always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Also, comment down below letting us know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.